Assalamualaikum. Welcome back to Landscape Planning Techniques ALA 2293. So last week we learned about suitability analysis using the method by McHarg, and today I want to demonstrate and show you how this overlay mapping and doing the suitability analysis work. Okay, so as we know, this analysis is usually done using GIS. But since you'll be learning about GIS next semester, what we'll do is that I'll demonstrate the fundamentals of understanding how the overlay works and how those gradients of colors play a role in our mapping. Okay, so for this demonstration, I'm using your Urban Studio site, which is Tanjung Malim. So as you can see on the screen here is a base map of Tanjung Malim. And you can see that the map has been divided into the grid. So this will help us to do the scoring for each of the areas in the grid according to their suitability. Okay, so previously, we learned that when we do suitability analysis, it can range from giving it a score of 1 until 5, which range 1 to be the least suitable for maybe development, and then 5 to be most suitable or with the one with the highest suitability. So in this demonstration, we'll only use 3 ratings, which is 1, low suitability for development, 2, moderate suitability for development, and 3, high suitability of development. So as you can see here on the right side, this will be the scoring that we'll use, and then we will also use the lightest color to represent the lowest suitability, the medium color to represent the moderate suitability, and the darkest color to represent high suitability. For this demo, I'll only use 3 inventory elements from the biophysical environment, which will be geology, topography, and hydrology. And then we'll see how this scoring add up to perform the composite map. I'll show you an example first of what I've done before I demonstrate how to do it. Okay, so this is an example of a map that has been given scores and also color gradient to indicate the areas which has the lowest suitability, moderate, and high suitability according to its geologic character. And this one is for topography. And this one is for hydrology. As you can see, the patterns are different because in hydrology, the areas in the light blue here is actually the location where the river is, as we can see back in the base map. On the base map here, you can see the location of the river, which is reflected on the evaluation of the hydrology mapping. So since each of these grid has a score, I have set a formula in Excel to automatically calculate the total score, in which it will add up all the scores when you give 1, 2, or 3 in each inventory element, which are geology, topography, and hydrology, which in the end, this composite map will be produced. So this map is generated from the scoring given in each of the grid from the previous maps. So once we have arrived at this total, I have set a range for the scoring. Okay, for example, scores of 3 and 4 are considered low suitability. Scores between 5 until 7 is considered as having moderate suitability. And scores of 8 and 9 are considered to be high suitability. So the same thing, we would set gradient of color, darkest to become high suitability, medium color, moderate suitability, and the lightest color, low suitability. So we would have to fill in the color on the map in the grid manually because this is not GIS, and we're doing this using Excel to demonstrate how the composite mapping works. So here we have a composite map that can now help you to generate your planning and design strategies. Okay, so now I will show you how it's done. So we'll start by looking to the base map. And I have actually set the pages in Excel sheet for each of these inventory analysis. So you can go ahead and try it right away. Okay, so we can start with geology. Okay, so for example, in this geology map, the assessment will be done based on the geologic character. So you should be referring to your inventory analysis data that you have collected for your studio in order to make this suitability analysis mapping. So we can start in this area. We know that this white area from the map and maybe from your inventory analysis and synthesis studio map, this is actually the hill area. Okay, so which means that if we think about the hill area for development, it may have low suitability for development. So I would like to assign these areas to be the lightest orange, which is the score of 1. So when you click on the grid, if you want to click on multiple grid, you can press Control, or if you're using Microsoft, or you can press Command if you're using Mac. Okay, so I've selected the hill area and I will give it the color peach, which is the lightest orange. You can decide on the color scale. Okay, so now we can see that this area has been assigned low suitability for development. So what I'll do next is that I'll key in the score for this area. So I'll just click in there and I'll press 1. And I'll just keep doing that for all of the areas that has the same color to assign it as having low suitability for development. You can either use your mouse or you can use your arrow key. So we'll do that. All right, so we have scored all of this into the score of 1 to indicate low suitability for development. Okay, let's do a few more to complete this rectangle over here and assign them with different scoring. So again, for geology, so since these areas are at the edges of the hill, perhaps you can assign them to be moderate suitability for development. So we can click on the grids and we can assign them the color of light orange and give them the score of 2. Okay, and then for the areas over here, since it is already an urban area and there are buildings and houses, we can note that it probably has a high suitability for development. So we can click on that. And we will assign them the darkest orange color to indicate that they have high suitability for development. And then we'll go ahead and fill in the score of 3. Okay, so we'll do the same for topography and hydrology because I want you to see how the scores add up to form the composite map at the end. Let's now do for topography. So again, we'll do the same grid. As you can see from the Excel sheet, we'll concentrate on A7 until G7. So it matches with the map before. So topography talks about slope, contours, and the physiographic character of the area. So as we know, if this is a hill, it would probably has high slope, which means that the sides will be steep, which indicates that it won't be suitable for development. So we'll go ahead and indicate these areas, the areas where it's actually on the hillside, to be evaluated as low suitability. And we can use the lightest color. Okay, that's a different color. I think it might be this one. Okay. And then we can right away color areas that have moderate suitability. So perhaps near the river, next to the lake edge, might have moderate suitability. Okay, so maybe these areas. So they will be orange. And then areas that are in the town, which is relatively flat, then they can be indicated as having high suitability. So you can either color it and then fill in the mark, or you can do alternately. It's up to you. So now that when I see the colors, it's quite easy for me to fill in these with the scores. You can also copy paste if that works for you. That's fine. Okay, so the orange will be score of 2. And the dark orange or maybe terracotta color will be 3. Oops, okay. Okay, so we're done for topography. And now to hydrology. So in Tanjung Malim, the major water body is only the river. Okay, but we also know that hills would have surface water runoff from the rain and also even the town. So we can evaluate based on these processes and criteria. So for example, we go back to the hillside, to the hill area. Because it is on the hill area, there's not a water body. And then we know that because of the steep slope, it would have a lot of surface water runoff because of the angle of the hills. So we can evaluate this as having low suitability for development. And then we also have the river, because the river is a natural resource. Yes, it can become a landscape spaces or recreational spaces, but because it is a water body, then we can also evaluate it as having low suitability for development. So this area, the scoring number 1 might be a bit more as compared to the previous criteria. So we'll cover the areas where the river runs through, and then also the hillside area, and we'll give them the lightest color. So in the legend, it is the lightest color of blue. Okay. So other areas, if you feel that, for example, these areas next to the river, because they may be part of the river corridor, and you wouldn't want the area to have so much development, so you can indicate it as having a moderate suitability for development. Whereas the rest of the other areas, because they are already a bit farther than the river, might be more suitable for development. Okay, so they can have the darker color. So as you can see, I have exceeded the grade, but that's okay. We'll just omit that in the calculation. So let's fill in the scores for each of these. Okay, be careful. Make sure you enter the digits correctly, because you wouldn't want Excel to miscalculate it. Okay, so for this area would be 2. So when you do the evaluation to decide for the scoring, you have to reflect back on the inventory data collection that you have done, and then the natural processes that happens in the area. Okay, and not simply to give it because of location, because it is still in the analysis process, and the scoring and mapping is just a tool to help us consolidate all the information that we have. When we have done giving the scores for each of the inventory elements, then you can click on the composite map, and then you will see that each of the grid has already been given scores. So this is based on the formula that I have set, in which I have added up each of the grid, and then the total would come up at the composite map. Now, what's left to do is to assign them the colors so that we can see the gradients and we can see the areas of suitability according to their low, moderate, or high suitability criteria. So we refer back to the scoring. For example, the lowest score would be 3 because we have only 3 inventory elements, and the lowest score for each would be 1, which means that if 1 plus 1 plus 1, the lowest score for the composite map would be 3. So here, the scores of 3 and 4 in light pink is indicated as having low suitability. So we can look for scores of, okay, we can omit this area because it have exceeded the grid that I done previously. So we'll just look from A7 until G7. So scores of 3 and 4 shall be assigned with the color of light pink. So we can look for the numbers and highlight them. Okay. Then we will choose the pink bucket and we'll indicate this to be low suitability. The next one is moderate suitability, which are scores between 5 and 7. So we'll look for 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so here's 6. You can click here. Okay, 5. Okay, so in this area, it's only this stretch that has the scores of 5 and 6, and we'll assign it a light purple color. And then for the scores of 8 and 9 for high suitability will be in darker purple. So we'll look for 8 and 9. Okay, and we'll assign it a darker purple color. Okay, so you can see now in your final composite map that the areas have been divided into low suitability, moderate suitability, and high suitability. So imagine if this were a series of your 9 or 10 criteria, then the final map can help you to decide, okay, what can we do now? Since this is low suitability, what can be proposed to it? Perhaps it can become a conservation area. Or if you still want to allow activities, it can become a forest park and be gazetted into whether the local park or the state park. And since this area by the river has been evaluated as having moderate suitability, so then you can decide to what extent can you propose activities. You know, rivers are such beautiful resources, but you don't want to destroy its natural process and also aesthetic quality. So maybe if you were to design a riverfront, what kind of riverfront and activities can only be allowed so that you can actually minimize the impact and still retain the natural processes. And then here, for 8 and 9, which means that it has a high suitability, which means the area can receive a bit more of development than the rest. So this would probably be the most suitable area if you wanted to develop housing, commercial centers, and institutions, basically areas that would have more built structures as compared to the rest. So when we have done it for the whole map, we will get a thematic composite map such as this, in which all of the areas would have a gradient of color to indicate their level of suitability. So this is why it is called suitability analysis. And the overlay mapping actually comes from overlaying the evaluation from each of the inventory elements. For your project for the class, it will be based on Tanjung Malim site. And I've given the base map and also the section for each of the inventory elements. So here, there are 9 inventory elements, which are geology, topography, hydrology, soils, microclimate, vegetation, wildlife, land use, and history and culture. So it's up to you. You can decide in terms of the color schemes that you want to use. And then if you look into the final map, which is the composite map, so all of the scores are currently 0 because we have not yet entered in our evaluation of the suitability on each of the map. So please do not change the formula in this final slide, in this final Excel sheet, because I've already included the formula for each of the grid. So what you will do is that you'll just assess and enter the suitability rating accordingly in each of the grid, like I've demonstrated before. And your composite map will be generated based on the scores. So since there are 9 inventory elements, the score range have changed. So as you can see here, I've indicated the lowest score will be those between 9 until 14, and they will be categorized as low suitability for development. The scores range from 15 until 21 will be categorized as having moderate suitability for development. And then scores that range between 22 until 27 will be for high suitability for development. And then after you have completed the composite map, then you're expected to come up with your landscape planning strategies on what you will propose based on the results of your suitability analysis mapping.